Even the most minor infractions may result in terrible punishments, which ranged from grisly deaths to countless hours of hard labor. Have you ever thought about the types of offenses that could result in such severe punishments? So, let's take a trip through time and learn about the gruesome world of the ancient Egyptian court system, shall we? Theft. Theft of public property was regarded as a serious offense in ancient Egypt, and the severity of the crime increased when the thing taken had considerable religious or cultural significance. The Egyptians held the belief that stealing from public property was analogous to stealing from the gods, and as a result, it was considered a terrible crime that required harsh punishment. If an individual was found guilty of stealing from public property, the penalty may sometimes be as much as 180 times the value of the items that were taken. The accused person would typically get a public hand-to-hand beating of 100 strokes as a form of punishment after they admitted their guilt, after which they would be required to restore the stolen items. If the accused was found to be in possession of a particularly valuable stolen object, there was a possibility that they would be cast into a river and eaten by crocodiles. The entirety of the sentence would be carried out in public as a deterrent to anyone who might be tempted to commit an offense comparable to the one being punished. In certain instances, the punishment consisted of severing the hands of the offender or striking them with 100 blows if the mummy was left in its original state. To ensure the safety of the tombs of the pharaohs, specific rules were enacted, and any who were found in violation of these laws were subject to severe punishments. Theft from a temple resulted in a severe punishment, including 100 strokes to the head and a fine that was 100 times the standard amount. This punishment applied regardless of whether the item stolen was an artifact or an animal. Even those who moved more slowly than expected to solve the problems, such as judges who did not provide justice in a timely manner, were not exempt from being punished. In one instance, the judge of the city of Matra was given 100 strikes, demoted, and then assigned to work as a horticulture agent after being removed from his job. Adultery and punishments. Adultery was considered a major sin in ancient Egypt, and as a result, those found guilty of the crime were put to death. This was done in an effort to stop the spread of this immoral act. According to the teachings of Ptah, every year 1,000 men pass away just because they are hopelessly smitten with women. Adultery with a married woman was deemed a serious crime that warranted the death penalty because of the potential for it to lead to further transgressions. In the event that a married woman committed a crime, her husband was given the option of either punishing her, forgiving her, or taking the matter before the legal system. Adultery was considered to be primarily the responsibility of the woman by the Egyptians, and as a result, women were put to death while men were given a considerably more lenient sentence of 1,000 lashes for the crime. Slave labor. The majority of people have the misconception that slaves were used to construct the pyramids. However, scholars contend that skilled craftsmen really did the majority of the construction. Despite this, criminals were still responsible for a significant portion of this enormous endeavor. They were considered to be a permanent staff and were tasked with the agonizing task of cutting millions of stone blocks out of the granite cliffs. These blocks of stone would be utilized in the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza. In point of fact, in order to construct that one pyramid alone, 2.3 million individual stone pieces were cut from the quarry. This demonstrates precisely how harsh the repercussions were for those who committed crimes in ancient Egypt. While the skilled laborers who were paid to build the pyramids did their job for only half of the year, those who were incarcerated were required to work non-stop on the project. However, the thieves were tasked with working on more than just the pyramids. In ancient Egypt, it was common practice to put criminals to work under duress, since it was more practical to put them to work than to lock them up. They were forced to work in the gold mines of the eastern desert rather than being locked up, or they were threatened with banishment to Nubia, which is the modern-day equivalent of the country of northern Sudan. A significant number of convicts were even forced into slavery and put to work as farmhands and housemaids. The mining of granite in the quarries was, without a question, the most laborious work that was available at the quarry. This profession demanded a lot of muscle force and a lot of strenuous effort, and there was a risk of significant injury or perhaps death if one of those things didn't happen. You should be thankful that you are not a criminal in ancient Egypt the next time you feel like being a little lazy. Grave robbing. Grave robbing was considered a serious crime in ancient Egypt, and it was especially frowned upon when the tomb in question belonged to a royal figure, such as a king, queen, or prince. A crime of this nature was deemed an attack on the state, and the penalty for such a crime was the death penalty. On the other hand, if the mummy was not disturbed in any way, the punishment could be lowered to the amputation of both hands or a thrashing consisting of 100 strokes. In order to protect these tombs from intrusion of any form, particular laws were passed into effect. Theft from a temple resulted in the same punishment, whether the stolen item was an artifact or an animal, 100 blows and a fine that was 100 times the normal sum. In addition, anyone who was slow in addressing such a crime was vulnerable to receiving 100 strikes, having their position taken away from them, and being transferred as a cultivation agent. This included the judge of the city of Matra. During the reign of Ramses IX, bribes were used to secure the freedom of various criminals, including grave robbers who had broken into the tomb of a king. Treason. The only punishment for treason, regardless of the social standing of the accused, was death, and this was especially true if the defendants were close to the king. Treason was regarded the most horrible act in the entirety of human history. This was the situation that arose when King Ramses III picked an heir to the throne, which caused his wife, T, who belonged to the middle class, to feel envious. She devised a plan to kill the monarch and put her son, Ntawar, on the throne in his place. The conspirators, including T, were apprehended, brought to justice, and sentenced accordingly. In addition, individuals who were found guilty of committing crimes against the king were not receive a decent burial, and their bodies were instead dumped into a river. Death penalty. The ancient Egyptians developed a powerful disincentive in order to put an end to violence and guarantee that the death punishment was administered fairly. Only murders committed with premeditation were eligible for the death penalty. In some instances, psychological punishments were considered to be more severe than the death penalty itself. There was no predetermined penalty for the act of negligent homicide. Nevertheless, the perpetrator was required to make amends for their error, suffer hardships, beg forgiveness from the victim's family, and compensate them fairly before they were permitted to go back to their own home. If anybody suppressed or withheld information about a murder, they would be taken before the court, and if they were found guilty, they would serve their punishment at the same area as the crime. Those who deliberately cause the death of an animal that holds great religious meaning could be put to death. The concept of Mot. Mot, which the ancient Egyptians placed a high premium on, has been the subject of a significant number of scholarly investigations. Mot was a philosophical idea that was regarded to be the basis of both human civilization and the cosmos. At its core, Mot contained the concepts of balance, order, justice, and harmony. Mot was also considered to be the foundation of the cosmos. Mot advocated for peaceful cooperation and stressed how important it was to connect oneself with its guiding principles in order to triumph over the shortcomings and dishonesty that inevitably came with a life lived on Earth. According to a translation of the lessons given by Minister Ptah Hetep of the 5th dynasty in Egypt, which state, "It is a way that extends out before the ignorant, but the poor will never allow a birth in any port. But the force of Mot, truth and justice, is such that it lasts beyond the days, and one can say about it, it is indeed the wealth that my father possessed." They were able to keep a distinct sense of their nation as a result of the ancient Egyptians' profound philosophical thought, emphasis on justice and order, and stringent governance of all parts of life. This was one of the amazing factors that contributed to the miraculous survival of their civilization for thousands of years. This is clear through their writing as well as the framework of their society, which kept a balanced approach to all elements of life, so preserving the health and happiness of the Egyptian populace. Murder. The ancient Egyptians had a profound reverence for the sanctity of life. As a result, they limited the use of the death sentence to circumstances in which it would not be in conflict with this fundamental concept. The penalty was differentiated between murder and manslaughter, with murder carrying the death penalty and manslaughter receiving a lesser sentence. In situations involving patricide or matricide, psychological punishments were implemented since they were regarded as being more terrible than the death penalty. For instance, The penalty for a son or daughter who killed a parent was to be burned alive, and if a father killed a son or daughter, the killer's body would be tied to the corpse of the victim for 3 days until decomposition while being guarded. Anyone who made a death threat against another individual was warned about the consequences of their actions. Those who were condemned to death by the people were given the option to take their own lives as a gift. In situations of involuntary manslaughter, there was no specific penalty. Rather, the offender was obligated to perform cleaning rituals, make sacrifices, beg forgiveness from the relatives of the victim, and pay adequate compensation. In addition, the offender was required to provide appropriate compensation. Those who covered up a murder or withheld information were also punished, and if proved guilty, they would receive the same sentence as the culprit. Those who covered up a murder or withheld information were also punished. In addition, the willful slaughter of a religiously significant animal would result in the imposition of the death penalty for the perpetrator. So the next time you whine about a tiny penalty, simply think of how the ancient Egyptians used to administer punishment, which was often rather severe. Their system of justice was not for anyone who lacked courage, as punishments ranged from amputations to assaults by crocodiles. However, it did a good job of keeping people in their place. We hope you like this video, subscribe to the channel if you're a history addict, and please let us know about what civilization or time period we should talk about. Also, watch another video here.